he got me addicted to it, so he's responsible for my current state of life. Now, the reflections I have on Krzysztof as a teacher are titled Krzysztof Michalski als Erzieher. It alludes, of course, to a famous essay by Nietzsche, the second of his Unzeitgemäße Betrachtungen, Schopenhauer als Erzieher, which was published in 1874. I employ it here, placing it as a title above my reflections on Krzysztof as a teacher and intellectual influence, with some hesitation. Above all, I don't want to indulge my narcissism. As recall Nietzsche's confession in Ecce Homo, that his essay was in fact more about himself than about Schopenhauer, so more about Nietzsche as educator. More, Nietzsche's reflection in his essay is conditioned by the fact that he never met Schopenhauer personally. The entire exercise thus takes place on the level of the abstract, however distinctly personal its tone may be. By contrast, I knew Krzysztof personally for an important, even decisive period of my life. My education actually took shape under his guidance, and I was and continue to be inspired by him. Perhaps given these caveats, the title is not the most apt. The motivation behind it, and why it still stands, however wobbly, is that I would nevertheless like to evoke Nietzsche's brilliant and complex descriptions in his essay of the cultural need that he believed a figure like Schopenhauer could fulfill. The need in question is for renewed confidence, even faith, not so much in ideas as in our personal capacity to pursue ideas. Such a need becomes acute in an environment where the life of the mind becomes more and more dominated by a busy but inane intellectual professionalism, and philosophy in particular burdened by a regime of scholarship that too often embodies only the most superficial of the values, masking the hollowness and poverty of its spirit. The problem of what it means to personally devote oneself to the cultivation of ideas in a world in which ideas are rapidly becoming the trivial products of an industry that bears little more than the nomenclature of the university, this is the problem of education that I wanted to evoke describing Krzysztof Michalski as educator. In Nietzsche's hands, the question of educator is accordingly a fundamentally personal one. It is about us, about who we are. It thus has no real sense unless we see it in personal terms. And in fact, I cannot describe Krzysztof as a teacher in any other way, so please indulge me in a little personal history. I first took courses with Krzysztof when I was a graduate student in philosophy at Boston University, beginning in 1990. The seminars were intense, challenging, unrelenting in spirit, though not without being punctuated by an occasional flash of humor, which often provided much needed relief. I think it is safe to say that if Krzysztof lacked completely any sense of humor, he would have been a particularly terrifying teacher. And humor was in fact deeply important to him, the basic part of a complex personality. He would often describe his occasional trips back to his native Poland as an opportunity to recuperate, regenerate his strength, and that essential to all that was catching up on the latest jokes from his friends, which he would rave about, but which, of course, could never translate into English. You only know what a limitation it is not to know a language when you lose someone who speaks and lives in it. Then what was once merely a possibly temporary limitation suddenly becomes profound, irretrievable words. Never overdoing the humor, Krzysztof's seminars were always focused, always productive, but the most important thing is perhaps what they were not. They were never workshops for the production of footnotes, the proselytizing of the agenda of one scholarly faction for the debasement of another. Nor were they ever meant to recruit disciples to help generate that professorial aura that all too often functions as an important currency of influence in the academic world. Though the manner Krzysztof would carry himself as a professor sometimes stood in stark contrast to many of the academic mores that guide professional scholars in the production of their reputations, he was not completely out of place in such an environment. He could basically name drop anyone under the table, for example, and in the process put to shame many who held themselves to be well connected.